Chapter 1, Prologue. The Emperor Who Wrote in the Dark. The wind howled across the Danube frontier, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant smoke. Inside a commander's tent, lit only by the flicker of oil lamps, sat the most powerful man in the world. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Augustus, Emperor of Rome, wore no purple tonight. His cloak was mud-stained, his hands were cold. Before him lay a simple scroll and stylus. Not military reports, not decrees, something far more private. He wrote slowly, carefully, as if speaking to himself across time. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Outside, 10,000 soldiers slept in uncertainty. Barbarian tribes gathered beyond the river. Disease had swept through the camps. Rome itself teetered between stability and chaos. Yet here, in this fragile moment of solitude, Marcus sought not conquest but clarity. He was 50 years old. He had ruled for nearly 2 decades. He had fought wars he never wanted, survived plagues that killed millions, and watched friends betray him. And through it all, he had kept a secret practice, writing to discipline his own mind. This was no grand philosophy for the public. This was survival. The Stoics taught that we cannot control the world, only our response to it. Marcus had learned this truth not in marble halls, but in blood and exhaustion. The barbarians would attack again at dawn. Soldiers would die. He would issue orders that condemned men to violence or saved them from it. But first, he would rule the only territory that truly belonged to him, his own soul. He dipped his stylus again. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The lamp sputtered, the wind pressed against the canvas walls, and the emperor, alone with his thoughts, prepared to face another day of impossible duty. This is the story of how he became that man, how a boy born into privilege chose simplicity, how a scholar was forced to become a soldier, how a philosopher learned to rule an empire without losing himself. This is the story of Marcus Aurelius. Chapter 2. The Making of a Philosopher. Marcus was not born to be emperor, he was born to be Roman, which meant something far more demanding. His family was noble but not imperial. His father died when Marcus was young, and his grandfather raised him in the old Roman way: discipline, duty, reverence for the gods. Yet even as a child, Marcus was different. While other boys trained with wooden swords and dreamed of military glory, Marcus read. He was 11 when he first wore the rough cloak of a philosopher, not as costume, but as commitment. He slept on the floor. He refused luxuries. His mother worried. His tutors marveled. One of those tutors changed everything. Quintus Junius Rusticus was severe, uncompromising, and kind. He did not flatter. He did not soften truth. One afternoon he placed a worn scroll before Marcus. "Read this," Rusticus said simply. It was the Discourses of Epictetus, a former slave who had become one of Rome's greatest Stoic teachers. Marcus opened it and read, "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond. Freedom is not found in changing the world, but in changing ourselves." Marcus read it again, and again. Something shifted in him like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was there. Epictetus taught that virtue was the only true good. Wealth, power, fame, these were neither good nor bad. They were indifferent. What mattered was how you used them. A rich man could be a tyrant or a benefactor. A poor man could be noble or contemptible. Character was everything. For Marcus, this was liberation, and he began keeping a journal, not of events, but of principles, reminders, warnings to himself. He wrote about anger, about vanity, about the seductions of comfort. He dissected his own weaknesses with surgical precision. "When you wake in the morning," he wrote, "tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they cannot tell good from evil." He was 16. His other teachers filled his mind with rhetoric, law, and Greek philosophy. Fronto taught him eloquence. Apollonius taught him resilience, but it was Rusticus who taught him the most important lesson, that philosophy was not intellectual decoration, it was a practice, a discipline, a way of living. Marcus trained himself to see clearly, to strip away illusions, to accept reality without complaint and then act with virtue within it. He did not yet know that he would need every bit of this training, that within a few years the Emperor Hadrian would die, and Antoninus Pius would adopt Marcus as his heir, that the quiet life of study he craved would be torn away, replaced by the weight of an empire. But the foundation was laid. In those early years, surrounded by scrolls and silence, Marcus Aurelius learned to be a philosopher. He would spend the rest of his life learning to be a good man. Chapter 3, Called to Duty, Becoming Emperor. Marcus was 17 when his life changed forever. Emperor Hadrian lay dying. Rome held its breath. Succession was always dangerous. Ambitious men circled thrones like wolves. But Hadrian had a plan. He chose Antoninus Pius, a steady senator with no sons of his own, and made one condition. Antoninus must adopt Marcus and Lucius Verus as heirs. Antoninus agreed, and just like that, Marcus's quiet life ended. He did not want it. He never wanted it. While others schemed for power, Marcus retreated deeper into his books. He studied law because he had to. He attended Senate meetings because duty required it. But his heart remained with Epictetus, with Rusticus, with the dream of a simple life devoted to wisdom. Antoninus Pius saw this and acted with quiet brilliance. He did not force Marcus into premature command. Instead, he taught him by example. For 23 years, Antoninus ruled Rome with steadiness, fairness, and restraint. He avoided wars, he managed the treasury wisely, he listened more than he spoke, and Marcus watched. He saw how Antoninus controlled his temper, how he deflected flattery, how he made decisions without drama or cruelty. Antoninus became the father Marcus had lost, and the model of what an emperor could be. But Marcus never stopped wrestling with his fate. One night, unable to sleep, he wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart." It was both surrender and defiance. He would not run from duty, but neither would he let it corrupt him. He would be emperor, but he would remain a philosopher. The throne would not own his soul. In the year 161, Antoninus Pius died peacefully in his bed. He had ruled for nearly a quarter century. Rome mourned. And Marcus, at 39 years old, became emperor. His first act shocked the Senate. "I will not rule alone," he declared. "Lucius Verus will be co-emperor. We will share power equally." No emperor had ever done this. Rome had always had one supreme ruler. But Marcus believed in shared responsibility. He believed that power corrupted, and that dividing it was both wise and just. The senators whispered. Some called it weakness, others called it madness. Marcus called it duty. He took the throne not because he desired it, but because fate had given it to him. And if fate gave him power, then virtue demanded he use it well. The philosopher had become emperor. Now came the far harder task, remaining a philosopher while being emperor. Chapter 4, 2 Emperors, 1 Empire. Lucius Verus was everything Marcus was not. Where Marcus was disciplined, Lucius was indulgent. Where Marcus studied philosophy, Lucius studied pleasure. He loved feasts, games, and the company of actors. He kept a harem. He gambled. He lived with the energy of a man who believed life was meant to be consumed, not contemplated. And yet Marcus never wavered in sharing power with him. The Senate expected conflict. Courtiers waited for resentment. Instead, they saw something stranger: patience. When Lucius returned late from parties, Marcus said nothing. When Lucius spent lavishly on entertainments, Marcus quietly balanced the treasury. When military campaigns required leadership and Lucius preferred the comforts of Rome, Marcus sent him anyway, with capable generals to guide him. Marcus understood something the Senate did not. Lucius was not evil. He was weak, and weakness was not a crime. One evening, after Lucius had been particularly boastful about a military victory he'd barely participated in, a senator approached Marcus privately. "Caesar," the man said carefully, "the people know Lucius did not win that battle. They know he spent most of the campaign in Antioch, dining with courtesans. Why do you allow him to claim glory?" Marcus looked at the senator with calm eyes. "Because the empire needs stability more than it needs my pride," he said. "Lucius is co-emperor. If I humiliate him, I weaken Rome. Better to let him have his theatre if it keeps the peace." The senator bowed and left, chastened. Marcus returned to his writings that night. When you are offended by someone's shameless behavior, ask yourself, is it possible for shameless people not to exist in the world? It is not. Then do not ask for the impossible. This was the Stoic practice at its finest. Marcus did not expect Lucius to be virtuous. He accepted Lucius as he was, and worked within that reality. The co-rule lasted 8 years. Lucius fought in the Parthian Wars, technically. He returned to Rome covered in honors, technically, and Marcus let him, because the empire held together, because soldiers had leadership even if Lucius was not providing it, because patience was stronger than pride. When Lucius died suddenly in 169, some whispered that Marcus must be relieved. They were wrong. Marcus mourned him genuinely. Lucius had been flawed, but he had also been family. And Marcus had learned long ago that you could love someone without expecting them to be perfect. The lesson endured. Leadership was not about surrounding yourself with heroes. It was about working with the people fate gave you and finding a way forward together, even when those people were fools, especially when they were. Chapter 5. The Plague and the Burden of Compassion. The soldiers brought death home with them. It began subtly, a cough here, a fever there, then it spread like wildfire through Rome's crowded streets. The Antonine Plague, they would call it, though Marcus would have preferred no name at all. Names made disasters feel distant. This was intimate, this was everywhere. Bodies piled in the streets, funeral pyres burned day and night, filling the sky with ash. Entire families were wiped out in a week. The living stopped counting the dead because the numbers lost all meaning. Estimates would later suggest 5 million died, perhaps more. Marcus did not flee to the countryside, though his advisers begged him to. Emperors had villas far from Rome. He could have ruled from safety. Instead, he stayed. Every morning he walked the streets. He visited the sick when he could. He stood at funerals. He watched physicians work themselves to collapse. He authorized emergency funds for food distribution, for mass cremations, for orphans left behind. And every night he returned to his room and wrote, "Death is a natural process. It comes to all. The universe absorbs us back into itself, as it must. Do not fear it. Do not resent it. Accept it." But theory was easier than practice. One afternoon, Marcus received word that one of his daughters had fallen ill. She was 7 years old. Her name was Fadila. She loved birds and could recite poetry from memory. He went to her bedside. Physicians hovered nearby, helpless. Faustina, his wife, sat clutching the child's hand, her face carved from grief. Fadila looked up at her father with feverish eyes. "Am I going to die, father?" Marcus felt something crack inside him. For a moment the emperor disappeared. There was only a father, kneeling beside his daughter, powerless. He smoothed her hair. "We are all returning to nature, my love," he said softly. "Some sooner, some later. But wherever you go, you will always be part of the great whole. You will never truly be gone." She did not understand. She was 7. But she smiled anyway, because her father's voice was calm. Fadila died 3 days later. Marcus stood at her pyre and did not weep, not because he was strong, but because he had learned that grief was private. His duty was to the living, so he returned to work. He signed documents, he met with senators, he authorized more aid, but that night, alone with his journal, he wrote, "Everything we love will perish. This is the condition of existence. Do not love less because of this. Love more fiercely, knowing it is temporary." The plague raged for years. It killed soldiers, officials, merchants, slaves. It did not discriminate. And through it all, Marcus remained present. He did not hide. He did not pretend it wasn't happening. He bore witness. This was compassion in its truest form, not sentiment, not pity, but the willingness to stand beside suffering and not turn away. The plague eventually subsided. Rome recovered, slowly, painfully. But Marcus never forgot the lesson it taught him, that death was always near, and that this made life not meaningless, but urgent. Every moment was precious because every moment was fleeting. And so he lived accordingly. Chapter 6. The Northern Wars. Philosophy in the Mud. The Danube River had always been Rome's edge. Beyond it lay forests, tribes, and darkness. For centuries the border had held. But now pressure was building. The Marcomanni, the Quadi, the Sarmatians, barbarian tribes pushed by forces farther east, began testing Rome's defenses. Raids became invasions. Villages burned. Soldiers died. And Marcus, who had never wanted to be a general, found himself forced to become one. He was 50 years old when he left Rome for the northern frontier. He would not return for 8 years. The camps were brutal: mud, cold, disease. The soldiers lived in tents barely better than his own. Marcus walked among them daily, not as a distant god-emperor, but as a man sharing their hardship. He ate the same rations. He wore the same weathered cloak. When supplies ran low, he sold imperial treasures to fund the army. Courtiers were scandalized. Marcus didn't care. "These men are dying for Rome," he told them. "The least I can do is stand with them." The wars dragged on. Victory was elusive. For every tribe defeated, 2 more appeared. Marcus learned the grim mathematics of attrition. He learned what it meant to send men to their deaths. He learned that duty was not glorious and it was exhausting, but the nights were his. After the day's councils, after the casualty reports, after the endless decisions, Marcus returned to his tent and wrote. The journal that would become Meditations was born in these moments, not in libraries or gardens, but in the mud and blood of war. "You could leave life right now," he wrote. "Let that determine what you do and say and think." It was not morbid. It was clarifying. Every day on the frontier was a day he might die. Every decision might be his last. This sharpened everything. Petty grudges vanished. Vanity evaporated. What remained was duty, virtue, and presence. One winter night, a young centurion was brought before him. The man had fled during battle, abandoning his post. The penalty was death. The other officers expected swift execution. Discipline was everything. Marcus looked at the young man, trembling before him. "Why did you run?" Marcus asked. The centurion's voice cracked. "I was afraid, Caesar. I am ashamed." Marcus was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, not with anger, but with exhaustion. "Fear is natural. It is not cowardice to feel fear. It is cowardice to let fear make your decisions for you." He paused. "You will return to your post. You will not flee again. If you do, the penalty stands, but tonight I give you another chance to be brave." The officers were stunned. The centurion wept with relief. Later, Rusticus, now an old man serving as advisor, approached Marcus. "That was mercy, Caesar. Some will call it weakness." Marcus looked toward the distant campfires. "Perhaps. But I remember being young. I remember being afraid. If one act of mercy can turn a coward into a soldier, then it is worth the risk." The centurion never fled again. He died 3 years later, defending a bridge. His name was carved into the roll of honor. Marcus stayed on the frontier year after year, fighting a war that seemed to have no end. He negotiated, he fortified, he adapted, and through it all, he wrote. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Hardship was not the enemy of philosophy, it was its proving ground. In the mud and cold, Marcus discovered that Stoicism was not an intellectual exercise, it was survival, and slowly, impossibly, Rome's borders held. Chapter 7. Among Fools, Remain Steady. The Senate chamber was a theatre of vanity. Marcus had learned this early. Senators postured. They gave speeches designed not to persuade, but to impress. They formed factions, traded favors, and pursued ambitions with the subtlety of hunting dogs. And Marcus had to work with them. One senator in particular embodied everything Marcus found exhausting. His name was Vettius, and he was a master of empty eloquence. He could speak for an hour and say nothing. He flattered shamelessly. He shifted positions based on who was listening. During one session, Vettius gave a passionate speech about the need for fiscal restraint. This, after years of voting for every extravagant project that came before him. When he finished, he smiled at Marcus, expecting approval. Marcus nodded politely, then he quietly proposed a measure Vettius had just claimed to support. Vettius immediately opposed it. His reasons were contradictory and absurd, but he delivered them with confidence, and half the Senate applauded. Marcus felt the old familiar irritation rising. He wanted to call out the hypocrisy, to shame Vettius publicly, to ask the Senate how they could tolerate such obvious dishonesty. Instead, he took a slow breath. "Thank you, Senator Vettius, for your perspective. We will consider all views before deciding." The session continued. The measure passed anyway. And Marcus returned to his quarters, opened his journal, and wrote, "When you wake in the morning, tell yourself, I will encounter busybodies, ingrates, egomaniacs, liars, the jealous and the surly. They cannot help it. They do not know good from evil. But I have seen the nature of good and bad, and I know that what is truly shameful is not their behavior, but allowing it to disturb my peace." This was the daily practice of Stoicism, not grand proclamations, but small, unglamorous victories over irritation and anger. Marcus dealt with courtiers who lied to his face, advisers who told him what they thought he wanted to hear, bureaucrats who embezzled funds, generals who exaggerated victories. And he remained steady, not because he was naturally calm. He wasn't. He had a temper. He felt contempt. But he had trained himself to pause, to remember that expecting fools not to be foolish was itself foolish. One particular incident tested him deeply. A trusted official named Cornelius was discovered to have been taking bribes for years. The evidence was overwhelming. The Senate demanded execution. The people wanted blood. Marcus summoned Cornelius privately. The man fell to his knees weeping, offering excuses. Marcus listened in silence. When Cornelius finished, Marcus spoke quietly. "You betrayed my trust. You harmed people who depended on you. You weakened Rome." He paused. "But I will not execute you. You will be exiled. Your property will be confiscated to repay those you wronged, and you will live with the knowledge of what you became." Cornelius was led away. The Senate grumbled. Exile seemed too lenient, but Marcus had made his choice. That night he wrote, "Revenge is a poison we drink ourselves. Justice is not about satisfying anger, it is about protecting the community and, if possible, redeeming the wrongdoer." This was the exhausting work of virtue, not dramatic, not celebrated, just the daily decision to respond with reason instead of rage, to treat even fools with basic dignity, to govern not with cruelty, but with patience. Rome did not always appreciate it, but Marcus was not governing for applause. He was governing to keep his own soul intact. Chapter 8. The Betrayal of Avidius Cassius. The message arrived while Marcus was still on the Danube frontier. Avidius Cassius, the brilliant general who had secured Rome's eastern provinces, had declared himself emperor. He had apparently received false reports of Marcus's death and seized the opportunity. Legions had rallied to him, cities had proclaimed their loyalty. It was treason, it was rebellion, and it could tear Rome apart. Marcus's advisors were unanimous. March east, immediately. Crush Cassius, execute his family, make an example so brutal that no one would dare rebel again. Marcus listened. Then he did something no one expected. He wrote a letter, not to the legions, not to governors, to Cassius himself. The letter was never preserved, but those present described its tone, calm, disappointed, almost sad. Marcus reminded Cassius of their shared service. He asked what had driven him to this. He offered to discuss terms, and he made clear that if Cassius stood down, there would be mercy. The advisors were horrified. "Caesar, he has betrayed you. He has divided the empire. You show weakness." Marcus looked at them with tired eyes. "He thinks I am dead. He acted based on false information. Is that villainy, or is that simply human error and ambition combined? He must be punished. He will be, but I will not slaughter his family. I will not butcher soldiers who believed their general, and I will not let rage dictate policy." Before Marcus could march east, word arrived. Cassius had been assassinated by his own officers. They brought his head to Marcus as a gift, expecting reward. Marcus refused to look at it. "Take it away, bury it with honor. This man served Rome for years before his final mistake. I will not desecrate him now." Then came the harder decision, what to do with Cassius' family and supporters. The Senate expected executions. Roman tradition demanded it. Traitors' families were always destroyed. It sent a clear message. Marcus defied tradition. He pardoned Cassius' family. He allowed them to keep much of their property. He wrote to the eastern provinces, offering amnesty to anyone who had supported Cassius under the belief that Marcus was dead. They were misled, he explained to the Senate. They were not traitors, they were confused, and I will not punish confusion with death. Some called him weak, others called him naive. But Marcus had learned something the Senate hadn't, that cruelty creates more enemies than it destroys. That mercy, strategically applied, was stronger than vengeance. That night he wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." It was easy to kill, it was easy to punish. The hard thing, the truly difficult thing, was to remain just when every instinct screamed for blood. Avidius Cassius was buried quietly. His rebellion ended not in mass executions, but in reconciliation, and the eastern provinces, which could have descended into chaos, remained loyal. Marcus had won not through force, but through restraint. It was perhaps his greatest victory. Chapter 9. Meditations. A book never meant to be read. No one was supposed to see these words. Marcus never titled his writings. He never organized them for publication. They were fragments, reminders, private conversations with himself. When he died, they were simply there, loose pages, personal notes, the inner workings of an emperor's mind. Someone, perhaps a secretary or a family member, collected them, copied them, preserved them. We call them meditations now. Marcus would have found that absurd. But within those pages lies something extraordinary, the unfiltered thoughts of a man trying desperately to be good. Of each particular thing ask, what is it in itself? What is its nature? This was not wisdom for the masses. This was Marcus interrogating himself. When he felt anger rising at a foolish senator, he would pause and ask, what is anger? Just a biochemical response, a temporary disturbance. Why grant it power? Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. He wrote this after a particularly frustrating day of political maneuvering. He was tired of debates, tired of theory. Stoicism was not about knowing the right thing. It was about doing it. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This became his anchor. When plague ravaged Rome, he couldn't stop it. When barbarians attacked, he couldn't prevent their existence. But he could control his response. He could remain steady. He could act with virtue within the chaos. The meditations are filled with repetition. Marcus returns to the same themes over and over: impermanence, duty, the brevity of life, the futility of anger. This is not poor editing. This is necessity. He was not writing a treatise. He was training himself. Like an athlete repeating drills, Marcus repeated Stoic principles until they became reflex. Until patience wasn't a struggle but a habit. Until acceptance wasn't philosophical theory but lived reality. Some entries are harsh. You are a little soul carrying around a corpse. Others are tender. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. The book is not consistent because life is not consistent. Some days Marcus felt strong. Other days he felt exhausted. Some entries are confident. Others reveal doubt. This is what makes the meditations powerful. It is not a sage dispensing wisdom from on high. It is a man, tired and human, reminding himself how to endure. One of the most moving passages is simple. Soon you will have forgotten everything. Soon everything will have forgotten you. Marcus knew his name would fade. He knew his empire would eventually fall. He knew that in the vast sweep of time, none of this mattered. And yet, he wrote, we must act as if it does matter, because virtue is its own reward, because living well is its own justification. The meditations were never meant to survive. They were supposed to die with Marcus, private tools for private use. Instead, they outlasted the empire they helped govern. They crossed centuries and continents. They guided slaves and kings, soldiers and poets, prisoners and presidents. Because what Marcus wrote in solitude, in exhaustion, in grief, turned out to be universal. We are all carrying burdens. We are all facing chaos. We are all trying to be good in a world that makes it difficult. And Marcus, from across 2,000 years, whispers, you can do this. I did. Not perfectly, but genuinely. And that is enough. Chapter 10. The Final Frontier and the Return to Nature. The city was called Vindobona. Today we know it as Vienna, but in the year 180 it was simply another Roman camp on the Danube frontier. Marcus was 58 years old. His body ached. The plague years had weakened him. The wars had exhausted him. He had ruled for 19 years, and every one of them had been hard. But the border still held, Rome still stood, and Marcus still rose each morning to do his duty. That spring, illness returned. Not the plague this time, but something quieter. A fever, weakness. His physicians tried everything. It made no difference. Marcus knew what was happening. He had written about death for decades. Now it had come for him. He summoned his generals and closest advisers. His son Commodus stood nearby, young, uncertain, nothing like his father. Marcus looked at them all with clear eyes. Do not grieve, he said quietly. This is natural. This is how it should be. The universe reclaims its elements. I am returning to nature. One general, an old veteran, fought back tears. But Caesar, you are Rome. What will we do without you? Marcus smiled faintly. Rome was here before me. Rome will be here after me. You will do what you have always done, your duty, and that will be enough. He turned to Commodus. The boy, for he was still more boy than man, looked terrified. Marcus wanted to say so much. He wanted to warn him about power's corruptions, about the loneliness of command, about the need for virtue above all else. Instead, he said simply, be a good man, that is all that matters. Commodus nodded, not understanding. He would become one of Rome's worst emperors, cruel and vain. But Marcus could not know this. He could only hope. The generals were dismissed. Marcus lay back, alone now except for his thoughts. He had done what he could. He had ruled justly. He had endured hardship. He had tried every day to be better than he was. It had not always worked. He had failed often. He had been angry when he should have been patient. He had been proud when he should have been humble. He had loved people who disappointed him and mourned losses he could not prevent. But he had tried. That had to count for something. His last written words found near his bed were simple. Accept death as nature intends, like the falling of a leaf, without fear, without grasping, just the quiet return to the earth. On March 17th, 180 AD, Marcus Aurelius died peacefully in Vindobona. His body was cremated with full honors. His ashes were returned to Rome and placed in the mausoleum of Hadrian. The empire mourned. Commodus took the throne, and the world moved on. But something survived, those private pages, those reminders to himself, the meditations. They traveled through time like messages in bottles. They reached people who needed them, soldiers in trenches, prisoners in cells, leaders facing impossible choices, ordinary people trying to live well in difficult times. And they still reach us today, because what Marcus struggled with, how to be good, how to endure suffering, how to find peace in chaos, these are not Roman problems. They are human problems. Marcus never claimed to have all the answers. He only claimed to be searching for them. And in that search, in that honest struggle, he became exactly what he sought to be. Not a perfect man, but a good one. Epilogue: The enduring flame of Stoicism. 2,000 years have passed since Marcus wrote by lamplight in that frontier tent. The Roman Empire fell. The language he wrote in became dead. The cities he governed turned to dust. But the words survived. Today, somewhere in the world, someone is reading the Meditations for the first time. Perhaps they are grieving. Perhaps they are angry. Perhaps they are simply tired of feeling powerless. And they read, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And something shifts, because Marcus was right. We cannot control the world. We cannot prevent suffering or injustice or loss. But we can control ourselves. We can choose how we respond. We can decide who we will be. This is not easy. Marcus knew it wasn't easy. That's why he had to remind himself constantly. That's why the Meditations repeat the same lessons over and over. Virtue is a practice, not a destination. We do not achieve it once and stay there. We must choose it again and again every day. When we are angry, we choose patience. When we are afraid, we choose courage. When we are tempted to cruelty, we choose kindness, not because we are perfect, but because we are trying. Marcus Aurelius was not a superhuman saint. He was a tired man doing difficult work, trying to stay good in a world that made goodness hard. And if he could do it, carrying the weight of an empire, fighting endless wars, losing children to plague, betrayed by friends, then perhaps we can too. The stoic flame that Marcus tended still burns, not in temples or monuments, but in every person who chooses to meet hardship with dignity, in every act of patience amid frustration. In every moment someone pauses, breathes, and chooses virtue over impulse. Marcus would be surprised to know his private journal survived. He would probably be embarrassed, but he would also perhaps be glad, because his struggle, the exhausting, unglamorous daily struggle to be a good person, is everyone's struggle. And in sharing his, he made ours a little easier to bear. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Marcus knew this, and now, across the centuries, we know it too. The lesson endures, the flame still burns. And that is enough. End.